You know, I've been a neurologist for over 15 years. I've seen strokes, brain injuries, even cases where there was almost no hope. I used to think I was immune to being surprised until one particular day proved me wrong. It was an ordinary afternoon, like any other. An elderly man walked into my clinic with his daughter. They were talking, smiling, nothing seemed unusual. She said his right hand had been feeling a little off lately. I asked him to lift both arms to shoulder level. He did it quickly. But then, his right hand froze. No tremor, no numbness, no pain. Just stillness. His thumb wouldn't move. It simply stayed there, as if it had been left out of the conversation. The old man fell silent, like a child suddenly pushed out of a story. And I stood there too, not because it was an emergency at that very moment, but because I knew that might be the final message his brain could send. If you've ever noticed someone's hand acting strangely, maybe it's worth stopping for a few extra minutes. Because that one small moment, if caught in time, might be enough to change everything that comes after. I didn't rush to speak. I just observed him for a while. His hand remained lifted, but something about it felt disconnected. The thumb looked as if it had frozen mid-thought, not quite curled, not quite straight, just suspended, like it had lost contact with the brain's command center. I gently asked him to form a circle by touching his thumb to his index finger. His left hand did it without hesitation. But on the right, the thumb barely moved. His daughter let out a small laugh and said, "Probably just some stiffness, doctor. He hasn't used that arm much lately." The old man smiled, adding, "Just old age. A bit of fatigue, that's all." I didn't smile back. Not because I wanted to worry them, but because I've learned something over the years: the body never jokes. And the most dangerous warnings are often the quietest ones. Pain doesn't always mean danger. And many of the most threatening conditions don't hurt at all. That thumb wasn't trembling. It wasn't numb. It wasn't swollen. But it refused to follow a simple command. And to me, that meant everything. After years in this field, I've come to believe one truth: when a single finger stops responding, it's rarely about the finger. More often, it's the brain trying to speak only in a voice too soft for most people to hear. Maybe this reminds you of someone. Someone who once mentioned their arm felt weak but laughed it off. A parent, a partner, a friend. A moment that seemed too small to matter, but for some reason, you still remember it today. If you do, hold on to that memory. Because sometimes, noticing at the right time is not just awareness. It's a way of saying, "I see you," even in the silence. And that, more than anything, can change the course of a life. We often assume that when a stroke happens, it announces itself with intense pain or a dramatic collapse. But in reality, it doesn't always arrive like that. Sometimes, it begins in silence: a finger that no longer moves the way it used to, an arm that struggles to stay raised, or handwriting that suddenly looks unsure, as if the hand has forgotten its own rhythm. These signs, though they appear in the hand, don't actually start there. They begin in the brain, quietly trying to get our attention through the simplest movements we often take for granted. Inside the brain lies a region called the motor cortex. It's the command center for all voluntary movements, everything from brushing your hair to reaching out to hold a loved one's hand. This region is fed by tiny blood vessels, incredibly small and delicate. And it takes just one subtle blockage, one narrow pathway, to disturb that system. But the brain doesn't panic. It doesn't scream. Instead, it whispers. It sends signals in strange ways: a finger that stiffens without reason, a motion that stops halfway, or a vague sense that something just feels off. The body always communicates. The real question is whether we're truly paying attention. And if you're sitting here, quietly listening, Maybe there's a moment tucked in your memory, a glance, a gesture that made you pause, even for a second. It didn't have to be dramatic. Perhaps someone moved a little slower than usual, or maybe you once dropped something familiar without knowing why. These moments come and go like a soft breeze. But if we're paying attention, they could be the first chance to act before anything is lost. Not just for ourselves, but for the people we hold closest to our hearts. I know our bodies don't always speak the same language to everyone. The early signs, especially in our hands, can be soft, vague, and easily mistaken. Some people think it's just the tremor of old age. Others say it's a minor symptom of diabetes. And many believe it's nothing more than stiffness from not moving enough. But I want to invite you to look a little closer. Because not all tremors are the same. Not every tingling sensation in your hands comes from poor blood circulation or aging joints. With Parkinson's, the hands often tremble even when they're at rest. The movement is rhythmic, steady, and usually begins on both sides. Diabetic nerve damage, on the other hand, creates a pins and needles feeling like tiny ants crawling beneath the skin. It tends to spread evenly and may come with itching or burning pain. But the hands affected by reduced blood flow to the brain, one of the early signs of stroke, feel different. They don't tingle. They don't hurt. They don't tremble. They simply stop responding. You ask them to write, and they move slowly. You try to grasp something, and they fumble. You bring your thumb and index finger together, one hand completes the motion, the other hesitates, disconnects, or freezes altogether. And then, often, people say, it's probably just age. But no. Aging slows us down. It doesn't make us lose connection. When your hand doesn't listen anymore, when once familiar movements feel awkward or foreign, it's rarely just a sign of getting older. More often, it's your brain's way of saying, something's not right. Does this bring someone to mind? Maybe a family member who dropped their chopsticks one day and simply laughed it off, saying, "My hand's been acting weird lately." If so, maybe today is the right moment to pause. To ask how they're really feeling. And most of all, to listen not just with your ears, but with your full attention. I believe what truly helps us stay calm in uncertain times isn't having all the answers, it's knowing what small steps we can take, here and now. And sometimes, just one quiet moment, one simple test, can reveal something important. You won't need any equipment. No tools, no fancy setup. Just 15 seconds, a chair, and your full attention. If you're with me, try this when you're ready. Maybe right now. Or perhaps later, after dinner, when the house is still and your thoughts are free to wander. First, stretch both arms forward at shoulder height, palms facing up. Close your eyes and count to 15 in silence. Just notice, does one arm start to drift down before the other? Is there a side that feels less steady, less responsive? If both arms stay balanced, that's a good sign. But if one noticeably dips, don't be quick to blame tiredness. It might be a quiet message from the opposite side of your brain. Second, bring your thumb and index finger together to form a circle, first with your left hand, then your right. Does one side feel slower, stiffer, less willing to cooperate? Don't force it. Just feel. And remember what you notice. And third, reach for a small object, a coin, a shirt button, anything that rests quietly in a drawer. Hold it with your dominant hand, and try placing it carefully into a specific spot, maybe the lid of a container, a dot marked on a table, or a small tray. Repeat this a few times, slowly and gently. Watch for the little things. Does your hand grip too hard or too loose? Does it tremble? Does it miss the target ever so slightly? This isn't about perfect performance. It's about noticing. Watching how your hand, your eyes, and your brain still move as a team or not. And if something feels off, don't panic. Don't rush. Just observe. And stay curious in the days ahead. Because sometimes, a coin placed just slightly off its mark is not clumsiness. It's a soft whisper from the brain, hoping you'll pay attention. These tests are not meant to diagnose. But they might remind you it's time to listen a little more closely. If any of this leaves you wondering, jot it down. Bring it to your next appointment. Ask gently, without fear. Sooner is always better. Because in life, it's not the words we didn't get to say that hurt the most. It's the belief that we still had time to say them. And if someone you love is sitting near you right now, maybe today is the perfect day to notice the small things quietly, attentively, not out of fear, but out of care so deep, you'll never have to wonder if you missed the first signs. There are moments in life when the person who seems to know the most is the one who misses the most important sign. Linda was an engineer. Recently retired at 63, sharp, independent, and remarkably healthy. When she noticed her left hand couldn't hold on as long as the right, she brushed it off. Probably from scrolling on my phone too much, she thought. A bit of numbness, a little fatigue, nothing serious. She watched videos, tried some self-checks. Everything looked fine. No red flags. She told herself, I've got this. No need to bother a doctor. She believed in logic. In data. In knowing her own body. James, on the other hand, lived a very different life. He was 78, lived on a quiet farm, and had never used a smartphone. He didn't trust health tips on the internet. But when he held his hoe and felt his thumb stiffen, something inside told him it wasn't right. He didn't panic. He didn't overthink. He just asked his son to drive him to the clinic. No one forced him. No one even expected him to be the cautious one. The result? James was diagnosed with an early blood flow issue on the right side of his brain. It was mild. Treatable. He received care immediately, and within 2 weeks, he was back in the garden, tending to his tomatoes like nothing had happened. Linda's story unfolded differently. 3 weeks after her first symptoms, she was rushed to the hospital. Her left side had weakened. Her handwriting looked like someone else's. When I met her, she smiled gently and said, "Maybe I trusted myself a little too much. Maybe I forgot that even the smartest people don't always know what their bodies are trying to say." And in that moment, I realized something that has stayed with me ever since. It's not always the most educated, the most confident, or the most informed who catch the signs early. Sometimes, it's the quiet ones. The humble ones. The ones who don't try to explain everything but who pay attention when something doesn't feel quite right. Because in the end, the body doesn't need us to be experts. It just needs us to be present and willing to listen. We often assume that when a stroke occurs, the body reacts with intense pain or a sudden collapse. But the truth is it doesn't always begin that way. Sometimes, it starts quietly. It might be a finger that doesn't move quite right. An arm that no longer stays lifted as long as it used to. Or a sentence written by a hand that suddenly feels unfamiliar. These signs don't always begin in the hand. They start in the brain, gently reaching out through the movements we often take for granted. Inside our brain is a region called the motor cortex, the part responsible for all voluntary movements from scratching your head, lifting a cup, to signing your name. It's powered by incredibly delicate blood vessels. And sometimes, all it takes is a tiny blockage, a narrow passage, for the brain to start losing control. But the brain doesn't scream when something goes wrong. It whispers. It speaks through a finger that stiffens without warning. Through a motion that stops halfway. Through a vague, nagging feeling, my hand feels strange. The body is always trying to tell us something. The question is, are we listening? And if you're sitting quietly with me right now, maybe somewhere in your memory, there was a moment that made you stop and wonder. It didn't have to be dramatic, just to glance at someone moving more slowly than usual. Or a time when something slipped from your hand, and you couldn't explain why. These signs come and go like a soft breeze. But if you're paying attention, they might be the very first invitation to act before something is lost. For yourself. Or for someone you love deeply.